The massive crystal doors of the Galactic Council chamber swung open silently. Nelson Mandela walked forward with steady steps, his traditional Earth clothing standing out among the shimmering alien outfits around him. At 95 years old, restored to perfect health by alien medical technology, he carried himself with the same dignity that had marked his years as South Africa's president. Behind him walked Tom and Jack, representing Mars and Luna colonies. They were younger, dressed in the formal black and silver of Earth's space coalition, their faces showing barely controlled awe at the chamber's grand scale. The ceiling stretched up for hundreds of meters, with floating platforms holding representatives from 200 different species. Earth delegation, please take your place at the observer's podium, announced the council speaker, his translated voice echoing through the chamber. The three humans moved to their assigned spot, a simple platform floating just above the chamber's floor level. This was humanity's first day at the Galactic Council. After discovering faster-than-light travel just 5 years ago, Earth had been contacted by the galactic community. Now they were here as observers, expected to spend at least 50 years learning how the more advanced civilizations conducted their business. Mandela looked around the chamber, taking in the variety of alien forms. Some looked almost human, while others were as different as it was possible to be. Clouds of gas contained in floating spheres, crystalline beings that sparkled with internal light, and massive creatures that seemed to be made of living metal. The council speaker, a tall being with blue-tinted skin named Robert, began the day's session. We welcome our observers from Earth. They have shown remarkable progress for such a young species, developing faster than light travel in their own unique way. We look forward to guiding them toward full membership in the coming decades. Several of the alien representatives made sounds that their translators converted to polite applause. Mandela noticed that most of the younger species, those who had joined the council in the last 1,000 years, showed genuine enthusiasm. The older races, especially those who had helped found the council 10,000 years ago, seemed to view the humans with something closer to board tolerance. Tom leaned closer to Mandela. "They're treating us like children," he whispered. Mandela raised his hand slightly, a gentle gesture for patience. He had seen this before, in the early days after apartheid's end. Those who held power often found it difficult to view newcomers as equals. The session continued, with various representatives discussing trade agreements, territorial disputes, and scientific cooperation. Mandela listened carefully, noting how the older species seemed to always get the better end of any deal. The pattern was subtle but clear to someone who had spent a lifetime fighting systemic inequality. Then came a discussion about labor practices in the outer colonies. The terms used were careful and diplomatic: economic assistance programs and developmental opportunities, but something in the phrasing caught Mandela's attention. He looked at the data scrolling across his translator screen, his expression growing more concerned with each line. Jack noticed his change in demeanor. "Sir, is something wrong?" Mandela didn't answer immediately. He was reading through historical records that were available to all observers, connecting pieces of information that painted a disturbing picture. The council's carefully worded laws about labor and development were hiding something ugly, something that reminded him of the darkest chapters of human history. As the session ended for the day, Mandela stood slowly. Tom and Jack moved to follow him, but he held up his hand again. "Not yet," he said quietly. "First, we need to learn more. We need to be absolutely certain about what we're seeing here." "What exactly are we seeing?" Tom asked. Mandela's eyes were focused on the departing council members, his expression both sad and determined. "History repeating itself," he said. "But this time, perhaps we can stop it before it goes too far." The three humans left the chamber in silence, watched by curious alien eyes. None of the council members suspected that their newest observers had seen anything unusual. They had no way of knowing that this had been the first day of a change that would shake the foundations of their 10,000-year-old order. After all, they were just humans. What could they possibly understand about running a galaxy? 3 weeks after their first council session, Mandela sat in Earth's diplomatic office aboard the massive space station. Holographic displays floated around him, showing documents from hundreds of worlds. Tom and Jack stood nearby, their faces pale as they read through the evidence their team had gathered. "It's exactly what we feared," Tom said, his voice shaking with anger. "They're using the development programs to enslave entire species." Mandela nodded slowly. "They call them indentured servants, but we know that name well from Earth's history. When someone is forced to work to pay off an endless debt, that is slavery by another name." The evidence was clear in the data. Younger species would be offered help developing their worlds, but the terms of the loans were impossible to repay. Eventually, their people would be forced to work in mines, factories, and farms owned by the elder races. The council called it economic assistance, but the reality was brutal. Jack pointed to another document. "Look at this world, sir. The people there have been paying off their debt for 300 years. Their children are born owing money to the council banks. Just like the apartheid passed laws," Mandela said quietly. "Control where people can go, what work they can do, who they can speak to. The methods haven't changed, only the scale." A soft chime announced a visitor. The doors slid open, and Robert, the blue-skinned council speaker, entered with 2 assistants. His smile faded when he saw the documents displayed around the room. "Ah, I see you've been studying our development programs," Robert said smoothly. "I hope you understand that these are complex economic matters. Your species is still learning about galactic-scale commerce." Mandela stood slowly, his eyes fixed on Robert. "We understand very well, Speaker Robert. My people lived under similar systems for generations. We called it by different names: slavery, apartheid, colonialism, but the pain it caused was the same." Robert's smile disappeared completely. "You're making comparisons that you don't fully grasp. These programs help developing species join galactic society. Without our guidance, they would remain primitive and isolated." "Those are the exact words the apartheid government used," Mandela replied. "They said black South Africans needed white guidance. They said we couldn't govern ourselves. They said many things to make their crimes sound noble." The air in the room grew tense. Robert's assistants shifted uncomfortably, their translator devices struggling to keep up with the emotional undertones of the conversation. "Mr. Mandela," Robert said stiffly, "Earth is very new to the galactic community. You don't have the experience to judge systems that have worked for thousands of years. I suggest you focus on learning rather than criticizing." Mandela walked to the window, looking out at the vast space station that housed the Galactic Council. "I spent 27 years in prison because I opposed an unjust system. In that time, I learned that those who benefit from injustice rarely wish to hear about it. But that does not make speaking the truth any less important." Robert's skin turned a darker shade of blue. "The Council has granted Earth observer status. That can be withdrawn if your species proves problematic." "Yes," Mandela said, turning back to face the speaker. "I imagine the Council would prefer observers who keep their eyes closed and their mouths shut. But that is not why Earth sent me here." After Robert left, Tom looked worried. "They could kick us out of the Council before we even join it." "Perhaps," Mandela agreed. "But I learned long ago that some things are worth any price. Freedom is one of them." He turned to his companions. "Prepare the data. Tomorrow, I will address the full Council." Jack and Tom exchanged glances. They knew that look in Mandela's eyes. Tomorrow would change everything. The council chamber was unusually full. Word had spread that Earth's representative had requested an unscheduled address. Beings from 200 worlds watched as Nelson Mandela walked to the central speaking platform. Tom and Jack stood at their usual observation post, data tablets ready. "Honorable members of the council," Mandela began, his voice calm but firm. "I come before you today, not as an observer, but as a witness to history repeating itself." The translation devices carried his words to every species in their own languages. The older council members shifted in their seats, some already looking bored. They had seen many young species make dramatic speeches before. 95 years ago, I was born into a world of apartheid, a system where the color of your skin determined your worth, where laws kept some people rich and others poor, where children were born into debt they could never repay. Mandela touched a control, and holographic images appeared around the chamber. They showed Earth's history: chains, slave ships, apartheid signs, prison cells. I spent 27 years in prison for opposing this system. My crime was saying that all people deserved to be free, that no one should own another person's life. He changed the images. Now they showed the Council's development zones, scenes that looked eerily similar to Earth's dark past. Workers in mines, children in factories, armed guards at labor camps. Yesterday, I read about a world called New Hope. Their people took a development loan from the Council 300 years ago. Today, their great-great-grandchildren are still working to pay it off. They cannot leave their planet. They cannot choose their work. Their children are born owing money to council banks. The chamber had grown very quiet. Some of the younger species were looking at the images with horror. Even a few of the elder races seemed uncomfortable. You call them indentured servants. We called them slaves. You say they need guidance. We said the same thing to justify apartheid. You claim it's for their own good. Every oppressor in human history has used those words. Robert, the council speaker, stood up. This is outrageous. You have no authority to. I have the authority of truth. Mandela cut in, his voice still calm but now filled with steel. I have the authority of someone who spent half his life in a concrete cell because he dared to speak that truth. And I see in your eyes the same fear I saw in the eyes of my jailers. The fear of change, the fear of losing power. He turned slowly, meeting the gaze of representatives from every species. But I also learned something else in prison. I learned that those who oppress others are also prisoners. They are trapped by their fear, their greed, their need to feel superior. And they can be free too, if they choose to be. The younger council members were nodding now. Some of the gas cloud beings had changed color, showing their emotional response. Even a few of the crystalline elders were vibrating in what their kind recognized as deep thought. Earth will not be silent. We will not close our eyes to injustice simply because it happens on a galactic scale. We will not pretend that slavery is acceptable just because you call it by a different name. Mandela's voice softened slightly. I forgave my jailers when I was freed. South Africa chose truth and reconciliation over revenge. We learned that healing is possible, but only if we first acknowledge the wound, only if we have the courage to change. He looked up at the council speaker. You have built wonders. You have mastered the stars themselves. Surely you can master your own fear. Surely you can build a galaxy where no child is born in chains, where no world is trapped in endless debt, where freedom is not just a dream but a right. The chamber erupted in chaos as Mandela stepped down from the platform. Some representatives were shouting in anger, others in support. The council speaker was trying to restore order. But Mandela just walked calmly back to Tom and Jack, a small smile on his face. He had seen this before. Change always began in chaos. 3 days after Mandela's speech, Earth's diplomatic office had become the busiest place on the space station. Representatives from 30 younger species had come seeking meetings. Tom and Jack worked tirelessly to schedule everyone while Mandela spoke with each visitor personally. The council has threatened to cut off our trade routes, said Green Light, a being made of swirling energy. But we cannot ignore what you showed us. The same banks that enslave the outer worlds also control our economies. Mandela nodded, watching the shifting patterns of light that showed Green Light's emotions. They use their power to keep others weak. This is why we must stand together. The next visitor was Stone Voice, a crystalline being from a young mining world. Her people had taken development loans just 50 years ago. Half our planet's minerals go to pay the interest on our debt, she said, her crystal form dimming with sadness. Our children will never see the wealth of their own world. As the day went on, more stories emerged. Some species had been trapped in debt for centuries. Others were forced to buy expensive technology from council merchants at huge markups. All of them lived in fear of having their trade rights revoked if they complained. This is how apartheid worked too, Mandela explained to the gathered representatives. They made us dependent on their system. They said we couldn't survive without them. But they were wrong. Tom entered the room with urgent news. "Sir, the council has called an emergency session. They're voting on new trade restrictions against Earth and anyone who supports us." As expected, Mandela said calmly, "The powerful always try to silence those who speak truth." He turned to the alien representatives. "Now each of you must make a choice. Will you accept their threats, or will you stand for freedom?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then green light moved forward, his energy form glowing brighter. "My people stand with Earth. The crystal worlds stand with Earth," Stone Voice added, her form shimmering with determination. One by one, representatives from 30 worlds pledged their support. Some were afraid, but all of them were tired of living under the council's control. Jack rushed in with more news. "The council's warships are moving into position around Earth's trade routes. They're trying to scare us." Mandela smiled. "They don't understand. I spent 27 years in a tiny cell. Their threats of isolation do not frighten me." He turned to his new allies. "Together, we are stronger than their warships. Together, we can build something better." The coalition members worked through the night, drafting their demands. They wanted fair trade rules, an end to endless debt, freedom for all species to develop their own worlds, the right of all people to choose their own path. When morning came, Robert, the council speaker, arrived unannounced. He looked around the room at the gathered representatives, his blue skin dark with anger. "This is your last chance," Robert said to Mandela. "Stop this foolishness now. Think of what you're risking. Earth needs the council's guidance." Mandela stood, supported by his allies. "No, Speaker Robert, the council needs our guidance. You have forgotten what justice means. We are here to remind you. The council has kept peace for 10,000 years. Peace without freedom is just slavery with a different name," Mandela replied. "We choose freedom." Robert stormed out, but his threats had failed. The coalition was growing stronger every hour as more species found the courage to join. Change was coming to the galaxy, and not even the council's warships could stop it. Tom looked at the growing crowd of allies. "They'll try to crush us economically. How can we fight the richest worlds in the galaxy?" Mandela's eyes twinkled. But we have something they don't expect. Something that will change everything." He turned to Jack. "Send the message to Earth. It's time to reveal our secret weapon." The council chamber was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Council warships filled the space around the station. Trade routes to Earth and its allies were blocked. The elder races thought they had won. Mandela walked to the speaking platform one more time. Tom carried a small black box, while Jack held a data tablet. The coalition members watched with excitement. They knew something was coming, but only Earth's representatives knew what it was. "Speaker Robert," Mandela said, "before you impose your trade sanctions, Earth would like to make an announcement." Robert waved his hand dismissively. "Make your announcement, then accept the council's authority. Your rebellion ends today." "Actually," Mandela smiled, "today is a new beginning." He nodded to Tom, who opened the black box and took out a small silver sphere. "The council has always wondered why humans developed space travel so quickly," Mandela continued. "How we went from our first spaceship to faster-than-light travel in less than a century. Today, we will share our secret." The silver sphere floated up from Tom's hand. A hologram appeared, showing complex engineering diagrams. The elder races leaned forward, suddenly interested. "All of you use quantum folding for faster-than-light travel," Mandela explained. "But humans found a different way. We discovered what we call the mirror space drive. It's simpler to build, uses less energy, and travels twice as fast as quantum folding. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. The mirror space drive was the biggest technological breakthrough in 1,000 years. Ships with this drive could ignore the Council's trade blockades completely. Jack stepped forward with the data tablet. Earth is offering this technology free to any world that abolishes indentured servitude and supports fair trade reforms. The Council members started shouting. Some demanded the technology be given to them. Others wanted Earth punished for keeping it secret. The elder races were furious that humans had found a better way to travel through space. Robert's blue skin had turned almost white with anger. You cannot do this. The Council controls all major technology sharing. Not anymore, Mandela said calmly. The mirror space drive was developed on Earth, by humans, without any Council help. We can share it with whoever we choose. Green Light's energy form pulsed with excitement. My people accept Earth's offer. We will free all indentured workers immediately. The crystal worlds accept as well. Stone Voice announced, her crystalline form glowing brightly. More coalition members began declaring their support. Even some worlds that had been afraid to join before now stepped forward. The mirror space drive was too valuable to ignore. Mandela turned to the elder races. You see, we learned something important from our history. Real change happens when you give people a way to choose freedom without fear. We're not using our technology to force anyone to do anything. We're using it to give people a choice. The Council's carefully controlled system was falling apart. With the mirror space drive, smaller worlds could trade freely without depending on Council-controlled trade routes. They could develop their own economies without taking loans from Council banks. This is your legacy, Robert spat angrily. Chaos. The end of 10,000 years of order. No, Mandela replied softly. This is my legacy. Freedom. The same freedom I fought for on Earth, now spread to the stars. He looked around the chamber. The Council can remain powerful and wealthy, but it must be through fair trade and honest cooperation, not through enslaving others. As more and more worlds pledged to end indentured servitude, Tom leaned close to Mandela. It worked better than we hoped. They're actually choosing to change. Mandela nodded, watching the Council's perfect system crumble. Give people a real choice between freedom and chains, he said, and they will choose freedom every time. I learned that in South Africa. Now the galaxy will learn it too. 2 days after Earth revealed the mirror space drive, the Council made its move. Hundreds of warships appeared around the space station. Council security forces marched through the halls. Robert called an emergency session, and attendance was mandatory. Mandela sat calmly in Earth's observer seat, watching the show of force. Tom and Jack stood beside him, their faces tense but determined. The coalition members were scattered throughout the chamber, surrounded by armed guards. The Council has maintained peace and order for 10,000 years, Robert announced, his voice cold with anger. We will not allow Earth and its allies to destroy everything we have built. The chamber's screens lit up with images of the warships. Robert continued, every world that has allied with Earth has 24 hours to withdraw their support. Those who refuse will be considered enemies of galactic peace. The guards moved closer to the coalition members. The threat was clear. Agree now, or face the consequences. Mandela stood slowly. Speaker Robert, I would like to respond to your ultimatum. There is nothing to discuss, Robert snapped. Submit to the Council's authority or face the consequences. Ah, Mandela smiled. Just like the apartheid government's last desperate show of force. They also thought that guns and threats could stop an idea whose time had come. He pressed a button on his console. New images appeared on the screens. They showed ships all across the galaxy, thousands of them, using the mirror space drive. Earth had already started sharing the technology. You see, Mandela explained, while you were gathering your warships, we were giving people hope. The mirror space drive is already being built in 30 worlds. By next week, it will be 100 worlds. You cannot stop it now. Robert's face darkened. Then we will use force. The Council's military. Will do what? Mandela asked quietly. Shoot down civilian trading ships. Bomb worlds that choose to trade freely. Show the entire galaxy that the Council maintains order through violence. He looked around the chamber. But there is something even more important you should know. Mandela nodded to Jack, who sent a new message to the screens. Earth formally withdraws its application for Council membership, Mandela announced. We will not join an organization that promotes slavery and calls it progress. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. No species had ever rejected Council membership. It was unthinkable. But then Green Light's energy form brightened. The light worlds also withdraw from Council consideration. The crystal worlds withdraw, Stone Voice added, her crystalline form pulsing with determination. One by one, 30 species announced their withdrawal. Not just Earth's allies, but other young species who had watched and waited. The Council's perfect system was falling apart. Robert was shaking with rage. You would throw away 10,000 years of tradition, of stability. No, Mandela replied. We offer something better. A new organization based on freedom and fair trade. Any world can join, but no world can enslave another. We will build our own future without chains. The Council members watched in horror as nearly a third of their potential members declared independence. The warships were useless. They couldn't attack hundreds of worlds at once, and the mirror space drive meant they couldn't enforce a blockade. You have a choice, Mandela told the stunned Council. You can change, grow, and join us in building a better galaxy. Or you can cling to your old ways and watch your power fade as more worlds choose freedom. He walked toward the exit, followed by Tom and Jack. The coalition members began leaving too, ignoring the guards who didn't dare stop them. This isn't over, Robert shouted. Mandela turned back one last time. You're right. This isn't the end. This is a new beginning. The question is, will the Council be part of it? 1 month after the mass withdrawal, the Council chamber looked very different. Half the seats were empty. The warships had disappeared. Robert had resigned as Speaker. The remaining Council members had finally realized they needed to change. Mandela stood at the speaking platform one last time. Tom and Jack watched from their seats, joined by Green Light, Stone Voice, and representatives from 100 other worlds. This was not a council session. This was something new. Friends, Mandela began, 30 days ago, we chose freedom over fear. Today, we write that choice into law. The chamber's screens displayed a new document, the Galactic Charter of Rights. It guaranteed freedom for all sentient beings. It banned slavery in all forms, including debt bondage. It protected the right of every world to develop at its own pace and trade freely with others. The Council has agreed to our terms, Mandela announced. All indentured servants will be freed. All development debts will be forgiven. A new era of fair trade will begin. The older Council members, those who remained, looked uncomfortable but nodded. They had spent 2 weeks negotiating with Earth and its allies. In the end, they chose to adapt rather than become irrelevant. Tom stood up with a data tablet. The mirror space drive is now available to all worlds, as promised. But Earth has another gift to share. The screens changed to show medical technology. This is what restored my health, Mandela explained. Earth's scientists have improved it. We offer this freely too, to help heal the damage done by generations of hard labor in mines and factories. Stone Voice's crystal form sparkled with joy. My people's children will live longer, healthier lives. This is what real progress looks like. Green Light pulsed brightly, and our trade network already reaches twice as far as the old council routes. Freedom has made us stronger, not weaker. The remaining council members watched in amazement as their former victims built something better than their 10,000-year-old system. Some began to understand what Mandela had tried to teach them about the power of forgiveness and cooperation. An older council member stood up. We were wrong, he admitted. We thought order required control. You have shown us a better way. Mandela smiled. In South Africa, We chose truth and reconciliation over revenge. We choose the same path here. The Council can join us as equals, not masters. Together, we can build a galaxy worthy of all its people. Jack stepped forward with one last document. The final piece, a new galactic constitution. Power shared equally among all species. Decisions made by discussion and agreement, not force. Trade based on mutual benefit, not exploitation. The chamber filled with approving sounds from 100 different species. Even some of the old council members were nodding, finally seeing the wisdom of change. "I am old," Mandela said quietly. "Soon I will return to Earth. But I leave knowing that the stars are free. That no child on any world will be born into slavery. That the galaxy has learned what humanity learned. That the only lasting peace is peace with justice." Tom looked concerned. "Who will lead the new Galactic Alliance?" "Not me," Mandela smiled. "Not Earth. Leadership must be shared, like everything else. The time of masters and servants is over. The time of equals has begun." The chamber erupted in cheers, each species celebrating in their own way. Green light glowed like a small sun. Stone voice chimed a crystal song. The sound of freedom echoed through the station. As Mandela prepared to leave the platform, he remembered something from long ago. In prison, he told Tom and Jack, "I dreamed of a free South Africa, but I never dreamed I would help free the stars themselves." He looked out at the gathered species, former slaves and former masters, all now equals, all now free. "Long walk to freedom," he whispered. "Very long walk indeed."